No, so. Hello, hi everyone, and welcome to, I think it's my, I don't know what it is now, 16th or 17th stream, something like that. So welcome to the stream again, Azure Greg here, and tonight I am joined by the one and only Sam Cogan. Sam, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. Good, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Glad to have you on. So you're going to be talking, well, let's chat a little bit about Pulumi before we get into any kind of demos.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what Pulumi is. In fact, introduce yourself for people who might not know who you are. Let's start with that.
Yeah. So I'm Sam. I'm a solution architect based in the UK. I work for a company called WTW, or what was Willis Towers Watson. We changed the name recently. And yeah, I'm an Azure MVP. I know quite a lot of community stuff around, particularly around IT Pro, Azure, infrastructure as code, all that sort of stuff. Rather than I'm not a developer. Let's make that clear from the start of this show. I'm not a developer. I come from the IT Pro background. But yeah. So that's what I do, and I spend my day fiddling about with Azure, and I do a lot of community stuff as well.
Awesome. I didn't realize when I was doing a lot of homework on you. I obviously know you quite well, but I didn't realize you had a YouTube channel which has a playlist for Pulumi for IT pros. I missed that completely. I don't know how I missed it. But
yeah, there's a few stuff on there. There's Pulumi stuff. There's also some Bicep stuff on there as well. So I dabble in a lot of different IEC languages. But yeah.
Controversially, what do you prefer? Which IEC tooling do you like to use? Let's start with some controversy.
Oh, it really depends. So Bicep is a really good language if all you're doing is Azure, and particularly if you're brand new coming to infrastructure as code. It's a great. Yeah. It's not got a really steep learning curve. It's a nice way to get into it. Whereas things like Pulumi or Terraform, a bit more powerful, I would probably say, but they take a bit more learning, and there are some compromises by going across platform and those sort of things. So it really depends what you're doing. Just don't do ARM templates would be the bit I would say now. Bicep's good enough now that you can stop thinking about ARM templates. But yeah, it really depends what you're doing. If you are doing multi-cloud or some of the stuff we'll talk today about, coming from a developer background, some of those other languages like Pulumi might be powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a developer background in C#. I'm a C# dev all my days, so I need to look at this because I haven't yet. The only reason why I haven't is all of the people intercept. We all do Bicep, so there's no point in me trying to go off and do something else that's not going to be relevant. So that's the only reason. But Alan Florence is on, so hello, Alan. He's saying Bicep for the win. Yeah. I like these questions because they're tricky. Because everybody's like, "What do you prefer?"
No, but I mean, Bicep is a really good language, and particularly if you sort of grew up with ARM, it's a massive quality of life improvement from ARM templates. So yeah, I still do a lot of Bicep.
We've still got customers doing ARM, and I'm like, you really want to make your life a better experience? And they're like, no, we've got all these ARM templates, and I'm like, but you can convert them. That's what they don't realize.
Yeah.
You can paste it in, and it will convert it for you.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm still working on them. I'm still trying to convert them to Bicep, but we'll see how we go. Right, so you've got some demos, or do you want to talk about Pulumi first before we jump into...
let's talk a little bit about it, because you find people that probably haven't heard of it, for some of them anyway. So Pulumi is an infrastructure as code language. It's a third-party product, similar to Terraform. So it's not produced by one of the major cloud providers. It's a third-party tooling. And it is quite similar to Terraform in some ways, in that it is designed to be multi-cloud. So you can do Azure, AWS, GCP, Kubernetes, all sorts of different providers. It's designed to be stateful, so it has a state file like Terraform. So, and we'll look at that in a little bit, but so that you can do, previews and destroys and all those sort of things. But its major selling point, perhaps compared to Terraform, is that it allows you to write your infrastructure as code in actual programming languages. So, if you use Terraform, you write it in their domain-specific language called HCL, which is not an actual programming language, really. It's a set of declarations and things to go along with it. And they've shoehorned some bits and pieces in, like loops and so on, but it's not really a full-blown programming language.
Let me ask you some absolute noob questions, because I haven't really done any Pulumi. Pulumi, is it free? Is there anything you need to pay? It's completely free.
Absolutely. So there is an enterprise version like Terraform, but you don't need it.
Right.
And you can it's all open source. You can do it all for free. There is similar to Terraform, there is an enterprise one where you can use it to store your state backend, but you don't have to use that. You can store your state locally, or you can store it in Azure storage or AWS S3 buckets, or whatever.
Right.
So you can do pretty much everything for free. There's a couple of enterprise features around policies code that aren't, but when we can talk about those in a bit. But the vast majority you can do for no cost.
So my other noob, I think I know the answers to these, but I'll ask them anyway. Can I open up Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio, and how do I get Pulumi?
Yeah,
I know you're going to show me this probably.
Yeah, so this is one of the really nice things about the fact that Pulumi works with real programming languages is you can use all of your tooling. So you can absolutely use.
Oh, the lights have gone off.
That's gone there. Anyway, you can absolutely use Visual Studio Code. You can, if you're in C#, you can use NuGet packages to distribute your code. You can use Python PyPy packages, or you can use npm for TypeScript, those sort of things. You get all the benefits of language. That I mentioned there is, so Pulumi supports several different programming languages. So you can do .NET, you can do TypeScript, you can do Go, you can do Java. I'm missing one that I can't. Python, and YAML, which isn't really a programming language, but yeah, you can do that as well. So I tend to do my stuff in C#, and that's what we'll show most of the demos too. But I've got a quick TypeScript one as well to show you. But
yeah, cool.
you can choose the language you prefer.
What was the other question I had? I had another question there. So I guess you could use things like Copilot to help you write stuff like
Absolutely, and that's what I do.
Right, awesome.
Yes.
What was the question? I keep thinking of the question there. I'm sure it'll come back to me. Right, okay. Just say a quick hello to Luke, who's in New Zealand, and I always say hello to him because he joins at like 6 in the morning. So it's always a good shout. Yeah, I need to definitely look at Pulumi. If a new feature comes out, how up to date is it? Like, are the providers all there, or
yeah? So this is one of the other advantages of this over Terraform. So Pulumi. Originally, when Pulumi came out, it took a lot of the Terraform providers because they're open source. It took those providers and brought them into this. And so there is the Azure Classic provider, which is called now, which was based on the Terraform one. So it follows Terraform's update cycle, which can be a little slow because it's all handcrafted. But there is now what they're calling their native providers. And so there's an Azure native provider, there's an AWS native provider, which are auto-generated from the Azure REST APIs. So that means basically is pretty much as soon as a new feature comes out, they will release a new version, because they're just basically running a build to hit the API and pull the new versions down. And so it has very large coverage of the whole Azure estate because it's just auto-generated and it's updated fairly quickly. It does have some downsides in that, and there are some benefits in the handcrafted approach that Terraform has, in that there are some things in the ARM REST APIs which aren't quite great. So the really obvious one is if you use the ARM API for Key Vault, you can't get the value of a secret from the REST API. It's not in the ARM plane, it's in the data plane. And Terraform, because they handcraft that, build some utility stuff on top of their Key Vault library that allows you to go and grab secrets for it. Whereas because Pulumi is auto-generated, it doesn't have that. Now, the nice thing with Pulumi, is because you're just writing code, I can write some C# code that just hits the ARM to the data plane API as part of my infrastructure as code. I can do that. I've still got to write it, so it's not quite as nice. I have to write some, talk to the Azure SDK and get the libraries, but I can still integrate that into my actual deployment. So it's kind of a nice escape hatch. Is that if I can't do it in the actual Pulumi code, I can just write plain old C# or whatever language we're doing.
I definitely need to look at this.
Yeah. And so that's quite nice. So let me share, and we'll have a quick look at what a basic program looks like, and then we can go from there. So let me just hit that.
I'll just add your screen, and then what I'll do is I'll hide us so you can show the whole screen.
Yeah. Okay. And apologies for me looking to the left, but it's on a different monitor, so that we
can.
No,
it's all good. What I'll do is I'll make your screen bigger. Right, there we go. Cool.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, so this is the sort of boilerplate C# one you get when you create a new project. So what I ran, actually, I'll just show you this first as well. So I'll zoom in a little bit. So the first thing I ran was, so there is a Pulumi CLI, which you can use to actually to do most things. And so I ran the Pulumi new C# command. And that's what I used to create the project. And it gave me a boilerplate project, which is what we're looking at here. And so this project, basically, Very basic, creates a resource group, creates a storage account, and then grabs the keys from the storage account and puts them in the outputs so that we can use them somewhere else. And let me zoom in a little bit so it's easy to see on the screen. So you can see basically it's using C# language to do this. So you've got variables, you've got methods, which are these parts here. So if we take a look at the resource group, we're basically saying create a new resource group. That's the type of the method. And there's some parameters we pass into that method. The first one is the name that we're going to give it in the Pulumi state file. That has nothing to do with actually what gets created in Azure. It's just the name that references the state file. And then we have this new resource group arguments section, and that's where we pass in all of the settings. Like if you were doing Bicep and you had all the properties section, same thing. We're passing in all of the values. Now, the nice thing you get, because you're using the IDE, you get all the IntelliSense that goes with it. So it will tell me, I could specify tags, and I've got some Copilot there that's giving me some autocomplete there. And these are just strings, string dictionaries, I think. So I could say, 220 by. There you go. And so and it's using the C# paradigm. So this is a list or dictionary, in fact. And if we go down a bit further, we're creating a storage account, similar principle, but it's got some subclasses in here. So the SKU is a subclass. And another really nice thing is it uses enums as well for some of the settings. So here, like the SKU name, instead of me having to figure out what the SKU name is and type a string in, I can come in here and I can pick from the list. And I've got it in my IntelliSense, and I can say premium LRS and so on. And there's a few of those that which make this life just a little bit easier. Same with the storage there and so on. Very cool. Then down the bottom here, I'm pulling in some the keys for those so that I can then use them somewhere else. In this case, I'm putting them in what's called an output. So this is the output here. We'll actually declare the output somewhere else. But anyway, so we're passing that out that can be consumed by something else if we wanted to. So I'm creating the output there. But this basically goes and grabs those keys for those. So that's kind of a very basic project. And you can see, yes, it's in C#, and there are some C# methods you can use, but it's not that different to Terraform once you get the syntax in mind. It's it's a list of properties and so on that you need to set. So a couple of other things to be aware of. So inside this project, I've got this program CS, which is my main file that I'm going to actually deploy. And you can see I've got these YAML files here. So this one is a configuration file. So you can specify some configuration for your project. So, these are just values that you're passing in. So in this case, I'm putting the location and I'm giving it the name for the storage account. And so you can see if you go back here with this line here, I'm referencing. So that config.require basically says go to that config file and get the storage account name. Now, this is really nice because these config files are linked to what is called a stack. And so Pulumi, in the Pulumi world, a stack is basically a bit like a workspace in Terraform or similar. It's an instance of your code being deployed with some settings. So you probably will have a dev stack and a test stack and a prod stack. And so each stack has a different config file. So that essentially means I can use the same code for each environment, but just change the variables in my config file and get different deployment. And each stack has a different state file to go along with it, and so on. So let's just show.
Can I ask a really daft question here? See if you go back. If you go back, you've got 3 YAML files there. How do you know which one it's pulling in? How do you know?
Yeah, well, so the Pulumi.yaml is actually just a configuration for the project as a whole. So that has nothing to do with my deployment. That's just the information there. I have 2 stacks here because I created one incorrectly in the first place. And so you need to tell it which stack you want to use when you deploy it. So when you come to the command line, basically you can do a Pulumi stack ls, and it will list the stacks that are available for you. And a stack, so I've got, I'm in the wrong project, that's why. Bear with me, wrong tab. There we go. So we've got that demo dev one, which is the one that demo file relates to. The other one is actually stored on a different backend, which is why it's there. I should have cleaned it up before we did it. But if there were multiple stacks on the same backend, it would list them all here, and I can select which one I do at that deploy time. You see that one's got an asterisk next to it. Zoom in a little bit. That's the one I've selected. And the stack is basically a combination of that config file that I've created there and the state storage on the back end. And so when I created it, there's a Pulumi stack init command, which allows you to create more stacks. And when you do that, you need to be connected to whatever backend you're using. It's probably worth mentioning that at this point. So the backend is where you store the state file. And there are various different options to do that. Same as Terraform, to be honest. So you could do local storage, which will just store it on your machine, which if you're just messing about with it is absolutely fine. But obviously, as soon as you want to share that with other people or productionize it, or you want to have it backed up, you want to move it somewhere a bit more resilient. So you can use Azure Blob Storage, S3 buckets, GCP storage things that I've forgotten the name of, those sort of things. So you can store in other places, or you can use the Pulumi service, which is you absolutely don't have to use the Pulumi service. There is a free tier, and you can use that for free anyway. But there is an enterprise option for that as well if you wanted to pay for it, but you don't have to. I am using the Pulumi service at the minute for this just because I have it set up, but you don't say you don't.
Wait, how do you set up the back end? How do you do that? Like, how do you choose what storage you want to use?
Yeah. So it depends. If you use a service, then all you do is you run Pulumi login without the local flag, and it will log you in, and that will set everything up for you. If you want to use local storage, you add that local flag, and that will set it up for you, and that's all you need to do. If you want to use a cloud provider, then basically what you need to set up is a storage account and a key vault. If you want to use the encryption, I'm going to talk about that in a second because that's quite important. But you set up a storage account and a container within the storage account, and then you set some environment variables. Usually the easiest way to tell it the storage account to use. And then you would use the Pulumi login command again, and you would give it, I can't remember the syntax at this point off the top of my head, but basically there is an AZ command that's something like this. And then you give it the container name in Azure storage. So storage. And it will log you in. So you basically just give it the details of the storage account or bucket or whatever you want to use for that. The docs are actually really good on that. So if you want to set that up, you can do that. I mentioned encryption because this is one of the other things that really sold this to me over Terraform. Is if anyone's ever used Terraform, you will know that the state file has loads of secrets in it because it basically records all of the things you do, which includes all the secrets for the storage account key and other secrets that you generate during the time you deploy it. And with Terraform, that's stored in your backend, so that, it's your storage, but it's not encrypted. It's a text file. If you get hold of that file, you can get all of your secrets. Wow. Now, there are ways to sort of fiddle with that a bit. There are some third-party ways of encrypting it, but none of them particularly work very well. Or you can pay Terraform a load of money and use enterprise service. Whereas Pulumi has that built in out of the box. So if you use the local storage, it will ask you for a password that you use to encrypt that config file and the state file with. If you use Azure, you can use Key Vault and use a key from Key Vault that encrypts your state file and your config. If you use the enterprise service, then it does that for you and manages the key for you. So that not only means that the state file is encrypted, but it also means that in that YAML file, so in this YAML file, I can store secrets in there, and it will encrypt them in this file for me as well. Which makes it a lot easier to deal with secrets. You can obviously pull secrets in during deployment as well if you wanted to, but it's just but in particular, the state file being encrypted made our security folks a lot happier.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Okay, so if we're ready to deploy, we can do a few things. So as with Terraform, we have a preview command. So we can run Pulumi preview, and that will tell us what it's going to do. And by default, it gives you a fairly compressed view of what you're going to do. And it takes a minute, but what it will do is tell me it's going to create those things that I asked for. So there we go. It's going to go create a resource group and a storage account. If I wanted a bit more detail, I could add the diff flag, spell it correctly. And this will give me sort of a more detailed diff of what's going on. It takes obviously a little bit longer to deal with, but there you go. I get more details about what it's going to create. You also saw if you use the service, it also gives you actually a link to the cloud service, which gives you the ability to go and see that information in the cloud service as well. Should you wish to. But if I want to deploy that now, I can run the Pulumi up command. And that will do a preview as well as part of this, so that I actually have to approve it. You can pass it the yes flag, and it will
Okay.
automatically approve. But it's going to give me that preview. I can actually click on details and get the diff as well if I want to. But I can then say yes, I want to go ahead and deploy that, and that will go and create those resources in Azure for me, as you would expect.
Sounds good. Yeah.
And then, similar to Terraform, if I want to go and clean that up, I can use Pulumi destroy, and it will delete all those resources for me as well. And that's always been the benefit of stateful workloads like Terraform and Pulumi, is it could clean up after you. Now with deployment stacks with Bicep, it does some of that for you now, which is a nice new feature. But yeah, it's always been a bit of a pain to clean up after yourself with Bicep. But with this, you can do that.
Good, cool. So, do you think having a background in Terraform is beneficial when you move to Pulumi, or
it probably makes some of the paradigms easier to grab in terms of the preview and then the up process and the concept of a state file, but I don't think it's vital. I think you can get going fairly quickly without that sort of knowledge. I'd say the learning curve with Pulumi is a little higher than something like Bicep, because you're picking up some of those new paradigms with that, but also it's going to be a little bit, sorry, wrong page. There's a little bit of work to get up to speed with how the syntax works with using what is effectively an imperative language with a declarative approach. Once you get your head around it, it's not too bad. There are a couple of concepts which we won't dive into on this, but particularly the apply feature, which I've got a video on that if anyone wants to watch it. But the apply process, which is a sort of a command in Pulumi, which deals with the fact that you're effectively asynchronously dealing with infrastructure, and everything is possibly not provisioned at the time you try and work with it.
Yeah, that's always a bit of a problem, though.
yeah. So that's kind of a basic one. If I just swap over to VS Code, so this is the same program, but written in TypeScript. And you can see that it's very similar setup. It just uses a different syntax for doing things. And zoom in a little bit. Yeah, this sort of similar. It's a very similar approach. So you can do that if you TypeScript's your preferred language or whatever. You can use whichever one is preferred.
My C# brain's got a question for you. If seeing the C# demo, how do you do? Can you unit test, or do you still have to do? How do you test?
So you can to a certain extent. So you can do unit tests, you can do mocking, you can do that sort of thing. But obviously there is a limit to how far you can go with unit testing before you need to deploy something. So we absolutely do write unit tests for some of our stuff, and it's useful to make sure that the thing you're planning to deploy actually is showing up and that it has the properties set the way you set it to. But at some point, a lot of if you're mocking the values for things, then it doesn't really tell you what you get. So at some point you do then have to deploy it, but then you can still do tests against that. And so you can do effectively integration tests against what you deploy using your C# or whatever test.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
But yeah, there are quite a few nice things you get because you're writing in a programming language. So to give you an example of a really simple one. So I'm going to add in here a value. Voice storage. So do that, and we'll set that to true. So this is a Boolean value. So if I want to be able to basically programmatically determine if I want to deploy the storage or not, then I can basically just say do an if statement, just normal C#, and I can say config dot require Boolean, the name of that key, which I've forgotten what it was now.
Deploy storage.
And just wrap that around there.
See, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah, and that's it. Obviously,
can you go back to your YAML real quick?
Yeah.
What's the see Pulumi demo? What's that? Is that just
So there's basically you add a prefix to the configs just so you can group things, so you can have different groups of configs. This is the default one that gets added if you don't add anything, because I added it manually in the YAML. You can actually add config values from the command line as well. So there is a Pulumi config set command which you can use which will do that. And if you don't specify a prefix, it uses the name of the project. Generally, if you're just writing normal config values, you would just write them in the YAML. But if they're secrets and you want to encrypt them, you need to use the command line because that's how it will encrypt them. But you can do just booleans and stuff in here. But you can do lists. So you can do this. And so you could do something like and then you could loop through that list and deploy multiple storage accounts. I won't do it now, but you get the point. I'm going to remove that now before it. But yeah, so you can do that. You can do for loops and whatever in the native language, and also you can actually just write plain old C# code in here. So if you get to the point, sorry,
could you do case statements and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you could do in C#, you can do within here. You do need to be slightly careful about how it runs because obviously bear in mind that every time you do a deployment, whatever code you've got here will run. If you're writing normal, like actual Pulumi code, it's designed to be idempotent. So if you run it 10 times, you get the same result. But if you write additional C# code that's not using the Pulumi approach, that code will run every time you run a deployment. And so you'll need to add in a check to say, if you're manually, you could talk to the Azure SDK and manually create some resources, that approach, but it'll try and do that every time. So you'd have to do a check to say, does this resource exists? Whereas if you created it as a proper Pulumi resource, you wouldn't need to, and it knows about that.
Okay.
But that's a nice thing to do. I mentioned the Azure SDK because if there are things you can't do in Pulumi for some reason or another, you can absolutely just call out to the Azure SDK and the REST API or whatever, and just call that manually. As long as you think about that idempotency, you can do that. And there's a common one that comes up is and I should probably explain the Pulumi Azure native provider before I talk about that. So the Azure native provider that talks to Azure is auto-generated from the ARM REST APIs, which is really nice in that it means it has very wide, nearly 100% coverage of all the Azure resources, and it means it gets updated very quickly.
Yeah.
But the downside is that it's not handcrafted; it's all auto-generated, and so if there are deficiencies in the APIs, they come over into the Pulumi code. So the prime example is around Key Vault, where the REST API, the ARM REST API for Key Vault, you can't use to get secrets. You can write secrets, but you can't retrieve them. They're all done on the data plane. And Terraform, where they handcraft the code, adds some utilities to deal with that, whereas Pulumi doesn't have that. But I can just write some REST API call to go and use the SDK for the data plane and grab that secret. It's not as nice, would I rather Pulumi did it for me? Absolutely. But, that's the downside of having the auto-generated approach. But I do have the escape hatch to do that. And there are some, unfortunately, truly terrible ARM APIs for some products where there are things like circular dependencies where you can't, you have to do one thing before another, but you have to do the other thing before you do that.
App gateway gives me
exactly. Headaches. So you can work around that by calling into the REST API after you've done your initial Pulumi bit to fix up those pieces. It's not ideal, but it is a way to solve the problem rather than just being that stuck and saying, well, I can't do it now. So it has some nice features of that. And it's not just Azure, obviously. You can call into anything. If you wanted to deploy some Azure resources and then you wanted to hit a custom API that you run in-house to do something, you could absolutely do that.
So question, see at the top of this, you've got using statements. Are you just bringing in NuGet packages?
Yep, exactly that. Someone's on mouse gone.
So could you, I'm just thinking out loud here, but see how you were talking about you create your own code to go and use the data plane to get the secret. You could put that in a utilities class and just make that available to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can even build what are called component resources for Pulumi. So they are effectively modules like you would have in Bicep. You can write those and they're reusable modules, and you can put them in their own NuGet packages and distribute them to all your users and say, here's the module for how we create VNets. Use that one. And it has all your custom code in it for do that, whatever. And you can distribute that, as a NuGet package. And that's absolutely what we do
and with that,
in my work.
Would that always, I'm just thinking out loud here again. So sorry for all the daft questions, but
no, it's fine.
If you did that, would that still use the latest version of the API, or how does that work? Like
Yeah,
imagine you did it 6 months ago and you wanted to run it now. Does it still call out to the latest version of the API?
To the ARM APIs.
Yeah.
So the ARM APIs are tied to, if you look in here, we've got the actual Pulumi packages. So in the NuGet packages, they've got the
These are
Pulumi Azure
tied to
native
version.
package there.
Yeah.
And the Pulumi package defines which version you use as default. So it's they don't change it often because that causes breaking changes when you do that.
Yeah.
So it's a major version of this. You see, we're on version 2 of the Azure Native Library. That only came out a few weeks ago, the version 2 release, and that was the first major update where they changed the default API versions. Prior to that, they'd been set for probably a good year and a half and hadn't changed. That doesn't stop you using newer API versions though. So in here, you can see I've got this storage account, and I don't specify an API version. That's going to use the default. But what I could do is I can actually call into, I think I have to fully reference it. But you can see, so that's normally how you would fully reference it, but I'm not doing that. But you can actually, there's a V here, and you can go and look, and you can actually specify the API version. So if you don't want the default, and you want there is a newer one, and you want to use it, they're absolutely there, but they're not the default. And so I've got to prefix the same to this as well. Yeah. And so you can absolutely pick the newer versions. When when version 3 comes out, they will then kind of reset and make the default the latest again. But so you don't want that happening every other week because it's going to break all your code.
So you would, if you wanted to come back to something in a year's time, you would really just need to update the NuGet packages, and you would get the latest version.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So you just basically update the Azure Native one, and it will have the new features available.
I mean, I do like this. I really do like this. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to have some time to just play a bit with this. But unfortunately,
and you can take it a step further, because one of the really nice things, because this is just C# code at the end of the day, you can use there is the Pulumi automation API, which is another feature on top of this, which effectively allows you to bundle up your applications into executables or into web apps or those sort of things. So at the minute when I come to run this, I have to run the Pulumi CLI to do a Pulumi up. But using the automation API, I can programmatically do a Pulumi up command. So I can have an executable, and so that's an example I've got here of this one. So this is a very basic demo, and you can see it's using AWS stuff, but this is using the automation API to basically give a program. And
Could
then
you zoom in a little bit if that's okay?
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm really keen on seeing this.
Yeah, and then I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but this basically allows you to programmatically set up a stack, pull in some configuration variables from wherever you want, and if you wanted to store your configuration data outside of Pulumi in a database or something, this is where you could do that.
Right.
And then it will programmatically run that up, or the destroy command, and so on. And so what you get out at the end of it, Explorer, is an executable in this case. So I'm building a CLI application, and if I run that, it's not going to work because I haven't set up any AWS.
Yeah, it would go on. But
it'll run through, and it'll there you go. It's going to try and set that up. And so I got an executable. So you could bundle up. You could have an exe that deployed your dev environment, or
that's crazy.
Or you could take it another step. And one thing I've been looking at recently is you could build a web API, and somebody makes a REST call to your API, and it deploys your environment. Nice. Or you could build like a self-service portal, or all those sort of things. So because underlying it is actual C# code in this case, you can do quite a lot more with it than you would be able to do with Pulumi without writing. I could probably make an exe that ran Pulumi. But I'd be calling out. I'd be shelling out to the Pulumi, to the Terraform API and those sort of things.
Daft question coming up here, right? So my brain's now thinking, without you showing me this exe thing, right? So in Bicep, I can put PowerShell around it and call it from DevOps and call it from GitHub Actions and all that. How would you do that with Pulumi?
Yeah, so there's a few ways you could do it. So you can absolutely just use the Pulumi CLI. So you can install that on your build agent, and you can have a bash or a PowerShell task that calls the Pulumi CLI. There is also a Pulumi extension for Azure DevOps that does pretty much the same thing, but it handles downloading the Pulumi CLI for you and configuring that. Or you could do something like this with the automation API, where you call the automation API from DevOps and do it that way. And there are some benefits to doing that in terms of how you can control how your deployment works and those sort of things. But you can absolutely do it as part of the pipeline.
Awesome. Yeah, this looks really nice, actually, I must admit. I always thought it would be good because I like C# and I like infrastructure as code, so why is Gregor not doing this? I've just not had a chance. But...
and it's one of the reasons we started using it was because we wanted to get more developer engagement in building infrastructure. We had a lot more developers than we did infrastructure experts, and we want them to sort of take ownership of that. And if you can give them a language that's using exactly the same language as they do to write their application code,
that makes
it a lot easier. It does have, there are downsides. If you've got a lot of operations people who aren't familiar with those languages, it can be a bit scary for them having to take on a programming language they've not used. But if they're familiar with PowerShell and stuff, it's not a huge leap from PowerShell to C#. It is a bit of a leap, but you kind of.
I'm thinking devs would love this. I'm not sure. Lots of ops people. I'm not trying to put MD down here, but I don't think ops. I think this might be a wee bit step too far for some ops people.
And there are things you can do to sort of simplify that. So I mentioned earlier that you can write YAML to do Pulumi deployments, which is very simple. I haven't got an example here actually. I can find.
No, that's fine.
But one thing you could do is you could write some component resources in C# or whatever as a set of developer teams that say, this is deploying our application stack, and bundle that in a component resource. And then the ops team, if they wanted to sort of build an environment, they could just take your building blocks that you've written in C# as component resources and deploy them from YAML. You can do that. You can have it. I'm not sure if it works in C#. It definitely works in things like Go and TypeScript, where you can call those from one language and do it in the other.
Okay. Cool.
So you could do that.
The one question that I always hear people saying, like, I have no Terraform background whatsoever. So if Terraform loses its state file, what happens with Pulumi if that happens? How do you get that back?
It's similar. So that the state file is really important. It basically tells Pulumi what it's done. So if you lost your state file and you ran Pulumi again, it would basically come along and say, I need to create everything because I've got nothing in my state file. And then it would try and create those things, and it would then complain because the resources already exist with the same name, but it's not managing them. Now, you can deal with that. There is an import feature within Pulumi, as there is with Terraform, where you can import existing Azure resources or whatever cloud provider back into a state file. But you'd have to go through the process of doing that.
And is that
there is also sorry,
is it quite easy to do that, or is it?
It's easy. It's just time consuming because you have to import each resource. There is a way to kind of do it in bulk with a JSON file, but you still have to basically tell it this resource relates to this particular bit of code in your file, so it knows. So it's not difficult. It's just time consuming. There is a refresh command for Pulumi, which won't fix that problem. But if you have somebody who fiddles with a resource outside of Pulumi, you can do a refresh and it will compare what's actually in Azure to your state file and say, okay, well, actually it's not the same. I need to revert, I need to actually go and change that back to what you've asked for in your Pulumi code. Whereas if you didn't run the refresh command, it wouldn't necessarily check that, which is slightly different from Terraform. So Terraform runs a refresh every time you do a deployment. Pulumi, it's optional. It's a design choice, I guess, but that's optional with Pulumi, whereas it's enforced with Terraform.
Cool. What's your favorite? Well, let's start with the negative. What's the least favorite thing about Pulumi? Is there anything
probably the least favorite thing? Probably the least favorite thing is the apply piece. Is getting your head around that piece. So it's I won't go into great detail, but the apply bit, as I mentioned, is how you deal with the asynchronous piece. So when Pulumi has any sort of resource, let me just go back to the other piece in here. So if we look at this account name, you can see this account name is not actually the string type, it's an input string. So input and output bracket type are Pulumi types that deal with this asynchronous nature of the infrastructure as code. So you can put a string in it, but you can't get a string back out of it unless you wrap it in this apply function. And an apply function basically says, I need to know what this value is now. If you haven't already deployed the infrastructure, you must go and deploy it now because I need
that makes sense. Yeah.
And then that's how it works. And it takes a little bit of time to get your head around that. And sometimes you end up having to wrap quite large pieces of code in that apply because the value is only available as a string inside that apply function. And it's just the nature of using this imperative language to do decorative stuff and do that. But it's a bit of a pain and a bit of it takes a while to get your head around. But once you've got it, you can usually.
I had some issues with Bicep and App Gateway, where it was just like couldn't get things to do things in the right order, and it felt like it was such dependencies and all that stuff, and it was just it's a bit torturous, to be honest with you. But we eventually got there.
Yeah.
What's your favourite part of Pulumi?
So the flexibility is really the piece that I enjoyed the most. It's just I can deploy resources, and it's easy to do. And probably I guess another favorite point is having the IntelliSense and so on in the IDE.
Yeah.
Just being able to go and do that, and Copilot works really well with it. And yeah, you can do that. But yeah, then being the flexibility of, okay, well, I need to be, I need to put an if statement in here, or a loop, or I need to do some sort of logic before I deploy this. It's a lot easier to do than figuring out with Terraform. Okay, I'm gonna use the local exec to talk to PowerShell to do some stuff, and then I'll get the result of that, and I'll pull that in. It's a lot easier to do that with just having native C# code.
Awesome. Yeah, really good demos. Really like it.
One other thing I'd also highlight, which is really useful if you are learning, is something called Pulumi AI. Let me just bring that up. So
sounds good.
If you come in here, you can basically use Pulumi AI and tell it you want to deploy something. So I want to deploy App Gateway in Azure. And it should go and generate the Pulumi code for me to deploy an App Gateway in my language of choice.
Why is Bicep and every other language in the world? Well, I guess it has got this. You can use ChatGPT, but this is nice.
Yeah. So, and this should tell you, this should basically give us the code we want to do this.
That's cool. That's very cool. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. And so, it's not always perfect, and it has some issues. But if you're just trying to figure something out, it's quite cool to be able to just go and ask it to do that.
Oh, definitely. We all get stuck doing this kind of stuff because sometimes figuring out the properties in Bicep can be a little bit tricky, and you end up looking at the actual code to figure out what.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a good way to do this. If you're finding the properties, you can obviously the Pulumi docs have all these things as well. But also, if you get really stuck, you can just go and look at the Bicep docs as well, because the properties are the same. Yes, you have to tweak it slightly to make it work with the C# code. But if you're just going to try and find, okay, what's the property name for this, you can actually use the Bicep docs as well if you get really stuck.
Do me a favour and bring up your Pulumi for IT Pros on YouTube. Can you share that as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've done a Pulumi for IT Pros YouTube series.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of really good series, actually. A lot of these playlists are really good.
Yeah. So I've got this playlist, which is the Pulumi for IT Pros. I won't play that, but yeah. So there's a course here. It's not finished yet, so we're still going. But there are 10 episodes there about how to use Pulumi, and it's designed to come from the sort of view of an IT pro rather than a developer. So I try and go a bit more detailed in some of the concepts that perhaps a developer might take for granted.
I like it a lot. How many videos you got left to do? Just a couple, or?
There's not huge amounts, and it depends how some of the stuff like talking about the automation API and things like that. I'm not sure how deep to go on those, because that gets into some really sort of developer-y areas that might scare some people off. But yeah, there's not too many left to go on that one.
Yeah, I did really like your Bicep course, because your Bicep course goes into real-world scenarios, and that's my biggest bugbear, where people will show you how to deploy a storage account and then maybe a web app, and I'm like, yeah, but that's not real-world scenarios.
Yeah, no, exactly. And to be fair, the Pulumi, the one I'm doing for the IT Pros, is a bit more esoteric. It is, storage accounts and basic things to get going. But I think once I've got that one finished, I may also look to doing a sort of similar one to the Bicep one with real life sort of project.
Brilliant. So, okay. Demo's over. I loved it. Absolutely love it. Yeah, I definitely need to spend some time on that. So you've been an MVP for how long? 7
years now.
7 years. Good stuff. So you were quite delighted to get renewed again.
Yeah. They keep letting me come back, so that's good.
Have you got any conferences lined up? Any talks? Anything good coming up?
No, I've not got anything lined up at the minute. I've put a few sessions in for some, but nothing's come through yet. So I don't have anything set up yet. Trying to think of anything. No. Is the answer.
I noticed you've been at your job for like 13, 14 years or something.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I've been.
What makes you like working where you work so much? What's so good about it?
Well, I mean, one of the things, I've moved around a lot within that business for the last 13 years. So I started off sort of doing support stuff, and I've moved through various roles. I did sort of technical implementation for customers, and then architecture stuff and cloud stuff. So I have a lot of variation, a lot of stuff, and I get to play with a lot of cutting edge things. We're one of Microsoft partner. And we do a lot of sort of very advanced stuff with Microsoft. So we get to play with a lot of things, and I get to just try them out. And my role at the minute is there's a lot of R&D stuff involved, which is really good because I just get to try things out, and then somebody else turns them into a production thing.
Oh, that's nice. That sounds good. What about holidays? Have you any holidays planned in the future?
I got a couple of weeks booked off in August. Nothing particular planned, but we've got a new baby. So I've got it's been 9-month-old at home now. So
you're not going to
do some stuff with him, I'm sure. But
congratulations on that. I didn't realize you had a newborn.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I haven't got many conferences lined up. Is finding time to do those things is always fun.
So I did see you at MVP Summit. What did you make of the MVP Summit? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was really good. It was really good to be back in person. I've missed out the virtual ones over the last few years. They've been okay, but there's something about being able to talk to people and talk to the product teams and stuff. And it was very, very good to be back.
And when you go, do you spend a lot of time with the product teams and talking to these people?
Yeah, I try to. I think some of that is more valuable than actually going to some of the sessions, or at least going to the end of a session and going and chatting to the teams. And just I do think that's very, very helpful. Just to get the information, but also to get to know the people, so you can always bother them later when you've got a problem.
Awesome. Will you take part in this year's Festive Tech Calendar? Can I?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I've only missed 1 year because I got COVID. So.
Oh, no, you're like to miss 1 year because you've got COVID. I don't have any plans as yet, but we just keep talking about it, and I'm like, we need this time to sort this out.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you think you'll be going to Ignite or not at all this year? No.
Hopefully, I will have to see if I can get some funding for it because I don't want to pay for those flights myself. But
no, that's for sure.
We'll see if I can get some funding. Then absolutely, I'd love to go. It's been a while since I've been to an Ignite in person. The last one was Florida pre-COVID.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't go last year because it was too short notice. I think that's last year.
Yeah, last year's wasn't great, but it looks like they've brought a tweet recently would have got a new format where you can actually go and do a presentation the first day.
Yeah,
pre-conference. That'd be good.
Yeah, that'd be good. I mean, I'm still feeling let down because they missed the one that was cancelled because of COVID. Was supposed to be in New Orleans, and I missed out. I'm going to that.
Love to go there. Really love to go there. Yeah, my girlfriend was dying to go there, and it's like, no, we're not going. It's like, what?
Yeah, no, same.
Cool. Right. Thanks for coming on, Sam. It's been really good. If you ever want to come on again, please just give us a shout if you want to do anything at all. Thanks for doing Pulumi.
No problem. I hope it was interesting.
It was very interesting. Something that I will definitely go and have a look at. I'll probably ping you with some questions at some point if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. I'm always happy to talk about it. So anyone wants to drop a comment on the YouTube videos or ping me on Twitter. I'm always happy to talk about it.
Put your socials up. So if you want to get a hold of Sam, you can get him on Twitter at twitter.com/ well, it's not even twitter.com anymore. It's x.com.
Whatever it is,
Sam, let's not talk about that. Sam Cogan. On YouTube, you've obviously the same name, which is easy to find. Get yourself on LinkedIn as well, and you can go to Sam's website. One thing I did notice on your LinkedIn, your link to your website doesn't work because I think
does it not? Okay, I will have a look at that.
Yeah, it just goes to HTTP and it didn't work.
Right, yeah.
No, copying that, I was like, I'll stick it in here. Right, thanks for coming on. Give me a shout if you want to come on any other time.
Will do.
And next time, tomorrow night, I've got April Edwards coming on to do an AMA, so we can ask her anything. So that should be good fun. And then later on in the evening, I've got David O'Brien, who runs a startup company who do security called Argo Security. So that's like a security thing for the cloud, so for Azure and then AWS and things like that. So I want to ask him all about how he did the startup and how he figures out all the information from the clouds and stuff like that. So that'll be really interesting. Looking forward to that. Just before we go, I'll just play a wee thank you video and that will play us out. Sam, thanks again. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.